One day, at a private clinic, a patient named Britt acts out by diving into a pond, using defiance as a tactic to tempt her doctor, Pierre-Francois, into marrying her. Observing the scene from a window, Pierre-Francois, unfazed by her antics, concludes she might need an adjustment in her medication. At that time, he's off duty, undergoing a cardiac evaluation conducted by his wife and fellow doctor, Gabby. Elsewhere, at a traveling fair, Odile becomes captivated by the sensual performances of a burlesque troupe in a tent. Jan Jam, the charismatic owner of the show, notices her interest and assumes she wants to join his act. However, Odile politely dismisses him, explaining she's a professional tennis player. Undeterred, Jan Jan offers her a position in his troupe, encouraging her to think it over before they leave town at the end of the week. Back at the clinic, Gabby discovers Pierre-Francois has a heart condition and warns him to avoid any strenuous activities, especially romantic ones, as it could be fatal. Pierre-Francois reassures her that his age has already tempered such impulses. Later, during a session with Britt, Pierre-Francois watches her dry off after swimming and becomes momentarily entranced. Britt, noticing his gaze, teases him to start the session. She claims her pond dive was inspired by his promise to marry her if she disobeyed him, a promise he doesn't recall making. Frustrated by her behavior, Pierre-Francois changes the subject, asking about her medication, which she insists she's been taking regularly. That night, Pierre-Francois contacts his ex-wife, Chantal, to return a painting, saying it no longer interests him. The next day, he boards a train and spots Odile asleep in her seat. Her beauty stirs emotions he thought long dormant. When she wakes, she asks him to notify her when they reach their destination, as they're headed to the same stop. Later, Pierre-Francois meets Chantal at the beach, where he jokingly downplays her concern over his heart condition. While there, he notices Odile enjoying herself nearby, her presence reigniting his desire for her. Disheartened when he doesn't find her on the train ride home, Pierre-Francois turns his attention back to Britt, who shares her struggles with intimacy. Exhausted by her elaborate fantasies, he dismisses them as frivolous, prompting her to splash her drink on him. The following day, Pierre-Francois attempts to exercise by cycling, but loses control on a steep hill and crashes into a tennis court. To his surprise, Odile is there practicing. Eager to reconnect, he tries starting a conversation, only to be brushed off as she heads to her car. Undeterred, he follows her, claiming to be lost, and eventually confesses his attraction. Skeptical, Odile suggests he find someone else to satisfy his desires, but Pierre-Francois insists he's genuinely drawn to her. Amused yet hesitant, Odile refuses his request to watch her practice, explaining she's focused on an upcoming exam. That evening, instead of meeting Pierre-Francois for dinner, Odile returns to the fair. There she watches Jan Jan promoting his troupe to the crowd, her thoughts still lingering on whether to accept his earlier offer. Suddenly, Pierre-Francois approaches Odile, choosing not to confront her about skipping their date. He assumes she's just as hesitant as he is. Nervously, he points out his freshly shaven face, asking her opinion on his new appearance. Odile compliments him, noting that he looks younger, which boosts his confidence. As they stand together, Jan Jan notices them in the crowd and seizes the moment, encouraging Odile to let Pierre-Francois buy a ticket to the show. He promises that stepping inside the burlesque tent will transform him. Skeptical, Pierre-Francois dismisses the claim and suggests Odile leave, but she refuses. Intrigued, she insists on seeing the show, despite his warnings about potential health hazards in the tent. Reluctantly, he follows her inside. Inside the tent, Odile watches the dancers with fascination, secretly yearning to perform like them. Meanwhile, Pierre-Francois grows uneasy, fearful that the excitement might trigger his heart condition. After the show, Odile drives Pierre-Francois back to the clinic. While he expresses how wonderful the evening was, Odile remains unimpressed. Feeling slighted, Pierre-Francois attempts to make a move, but Odile is offended and pushes him out of her car. Later that night, back in her home, Odile experiences a dizzy spell and a nosebleed, leaving her worried. The next morning, a doctor leaves her residence after examining her. Confined to bed, Odile drifts into a vivid dream where Pierre-Francois admires her bare form, fueling her excitement. The dream shifts to a scene in a dressing room where she faints unexpectedly. Later, Jan Jan questions Odile about her relationship with Pierre-Francois. She brushes it off, claiming he's her uncle, though she remains fixated on why Pierre-Francois acted like he didn't recognize her the night before. Jan Jan explains that he was probably in work mode and focused on his duties. Shifting topics, he informs her that the troupe plans to travel to Angoulême and invites her to join them as a dancer. Curious about the move, Odile learns that Angoulême offers a discreet environment, preserving her anonymity. At the fair, Odile mingles with the burlesque performers and learns from Chipper that they often take smaller gigs in Paris once the season ends. When Odile asks if their audiences ever proposition them, Sisa admits that some men offer large sums for intimate encounters. Though she personally avoids such offers, she confesses she might reconsider if she genuinely likes the man. Inspired by the audience's admiration, SZA reveals that it motivates her to give her best performances. The performers then ask Odile what she seeks from her audience. Smiling, she replies, to drive them wild. That same day, while coaching her tennis students, Odile received a surprising phone call from Pierre Francois. Apologizing for his behavior the previous night, he's relieved, which she accepts. Strangely, she finds their interaction flattering, which Pierre Francois misinterprets as flirtation. Odile swiftly changes the topic, asking if he's free on Sunday. Eagerly, Pierre Francois confirms, and Odile invites him to accompany her to Angoulême. Caught off guard by the choice of location known for its wild reputation, Pierre Francois hesitates. To reassure him, Odile fibs about visiting her aunt, convincing him to join her. On Sunday, Pierre Francois finds himself riding in Jan Jan's car. To his surprise, he enjoys the journey and feels unexpectedly at ease. Upon arriving in Angoulême, Jan Jan drops Pierre Francois off at a restaurant, instructing him to wait there for them. Jihan takes Odile to a fair managed by his acquaintance, whom he refers to as the aunt. Upon seeing them, the aunt approaches and Jihan introduces Odile with pride, highlighting her athleticism. However, the aunt remains unimpressed, comparing her to the courtesans under his management. Odile's confidence falters, but with no other option, she proceeds with the audition. When asked to perform, Odile admits she hasn't prepared a routine. The aunt insists she try anyway, but Odile hesitantly suggests disrobing instead. Before deciding, the aunt asks Jihan if Odile is his girlfriend, and Jihan confirms. With this context, the aunt forbids disrobing and urges Odile to dance instead. After the audition, Odile discreetly tends to a nosebleed and overhears Jihan bidding farewell to the aunt. Anxious, she asks Jihan if the aunt rejected her, but he assures her she's still being considered. Shifting the topic, Odile confronts Jihan about calling her his girlfriend. Jihan explains that having a romantic spark could enhance her performances, observing that her life seems to lack such passion. Though Odile denies needing a lover, Jihan disagrees. Later, at a restaurant, Odile teases Pierre Francois for sulking. Pierre admits his frustration, questioning the identity of her so-called aunt at the fair. Dodging the question, Odile expresses surprise that he didn't enjoy the trip. Pierre counters, admitting he did, but he's insulted by her mixed signals about their relationship. He feels humiliated, having traveled far and endured a greasy restaurant only to be denied intimacy. Jihan interjects, claiming Odile doesn't care about Pierre because of his age. Tired of the discussion, Odile requests directions to the train station from a waitress. That night, Pierre Francois experiences a string of misfortunes. His motel room has poor ventilation, forcing him to open the windows. A public restroom is occupied, leading him to relieve himself outside, only to be chased by a dog. By dawn, Pierre is surprised when Odile joins him in his room despite saying she'd leave. She embraces him and Pierre feels conflicted, disgusted by his longing for her. As they talk, Pierre becomes delirious, describing a vision of a beautiful woman emerging from a well. He declares his intent to abandon his career as a neurosurgeon, willing to become a horse butcher or even a clown in Jihan's troupe to be with her. Sensing Odile's hesitation, he pleads, confessing how badly he wanted her the previous night. Parched, he drinks from his thermos and professes that she's the last woman he'll ever love. Moved by his vulnerability, Odile gives in, sharing an intimate moment with him. Afterward, Pierre experiences the symptoms of an attack and encourages Odile to sleep beside him. As he drifts off, Odile gets up and notices another nosebleed. The next morning, Jihan barges into Pierre's motel room, urging Odile to prepare for her debut performance. Disoriented, Pierre learns that Odile will perform for the audience. At the aunt's tent, Odile's physique is inspected, and the aunt insists she remain clothed, though she must remove her undergarments. While Pierre waits in the lounge, one of the aunt's dancers bursts in, declaring she's quitting due to the audience's inappropriate behavior. With no time to waste, the aunt pushes Odile to perform. Despite feeling unwell, Odile smiles at Jihan's encouragement and takes the stage. As she begins her act, nausea overtakes her, but she perseveres, earning the audience's approval as she disrobes. Pushing through the pain, Odile suddenly collapses into the crowd. Pierre rushes to her side only to discover, heartbroken, that she has passed away, blood dripping from her nose. Later, Jihan drives a mournful Pierre Francois home. They read a letter from Odile, revealing she had been experiencing frequent hemorrhages and planned to return to the hospital for treatment. Back in the city, Pierre awakens alone in the car and walks home, reflecting on his journey with Odile. Coming to terms with his desires and her tragic end, he embraces the uncertainty of what lies ahead.